Good morning from beautiful Playa del Carmen, Mexico. So I've been living in Playa del Carmen for 6 weeks now, and so far I love it. And in this video, I'm going to share with you some information on things you need to know if you want to move to Playa del Carmen, or if you just want to visit for a few weeks or a few days. And some of this information includes things that I haven't found or people aren't really discussing on YouTube. So I hope you find it useful, and make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. So let's get into it. So number one, there's more to Playa del Carmen than Fifth Avenue. So the reaction that I get from people when I usually tell them that I'm moving to Playa del Carmen or that I'm living in Playa del Carmen, the reaction that I get from people who don't live here or who live outside of Playa del Carmen is that, why would you want to go there? It's so touristy, there's so many people, there's so many crowds, it's trashy, it's scammy. And while there are elements of that in Playa del Carmen, I find that those parts of Playa del Carmen are usually associated with Fifth Avenue or the blocks around Fifth Avenue or in central Playa del Carmen. But there's actually more to Playa del Carmen than Fifth Avenue, and the more that you explore and get out of the central or away from Fifth Avenue in the center of town, the more you get to see the diversity. For example, in neighborhoods like Real, Ibiza, Colosio, and Ejidal. Now I live in Colosio, which is north of Avenida CTM or CTM Avenue. Avenida CTM is interesting because it divides the north part of Playa del Carmen, which has a lot of expats and tourists, from the south side of Playa del Carmen, where there's Colosio, and there are a lot more locals living in that neighborhood. And that's where I live. I live between Playa 88 and Punta Esmeralda. And what I like about living in this part is that it's less touristy, less expats, there's less crowds and noise that's typically associated with Playa del Carmen, or at least Fifth Avenue in the center. And it kind of has a reputation. Some people think of Colosio as being sketchy or grimy, and it does have those elements. But to me, parts of Brooklyn are also sketchy and grimy. Parts of Queens are also sketchy and grimy. I used to live in Toronto, and Parkdale and West Queen West was sketchy. In Vancouver, the downtown east side can also be sketchy. So just like that, there are elements of Colosio which I would say are kind of sketchy or less safe. But it's also a neighborhood that's also beginning to be regenerated and gentrified a little bit. So there are pockets where they're like expats like myself or digital nomads, they're locals, they're artists, there's some cool restaurants. Cool shops. And I really like it because, like I said, there's less of the partiers and the noise and the crowds that's associated with the center of Playa del Carmen around 5th Avenue, 24th and 26th. So basically, the more that you explore outside of Playa del Carmen and get to see other neighborhoods, the more you'll see that there's more to Playa del Carmen than 5th Avenue. So I definitely encourage you to get out and explore the town more. Okay, tip number 2. Be friendly and treat the locals with respect. I've been living in Mexico on and off for 3 years, and something that I've seen not just in Playa del Carmen but in other parts of Mexico is that sometimes foreigners, expats, tourists don't actually treat locals with respect. A few weeks ago, for example, a Canadian woman in Merida made the headlines here because she beat up a young Mexican girl. She owns a restaurant, and the girl she beat up was the daughter of a rival business. And although that's an extreme example, it's just a case of how I think as expats or foreigners that come here, sometimes we tend to forget that we are living in a foreign country. Even if we are a resident, we're still in a foreign country, and this is not our home. And with that in mind, we should always treat the people here with respect and dignity. I've generally found that Mexicans are very warm, they're very friendly, they're very welcoming and inviting to their country. And I've, for the most part, always been treated with respect and dignity by Mexicans. So I think as people who are visiting and staying in their country, we should extend the same courtesy to them as well. Because like I've said, I've seen people be rude to waiters, taxi drivers, service staff. And I think in a country where, and I think for a country that's generally open to tourists right now compared to other countries in the world, we should at least also be welcoming to them, especially during this time that we're living in. So just simple things like saying good morning, good afternoon, good night, please and thank you really goes a long way, especially if you do it in Spanish as well. So even just attempting to learn Spanish, I think, is a form of courtesy and respect to people, because you can't expect in a country where Spanish is the main language form of communication that you can go everywhere and just speak English. So I think just extending that courtesy and at least trying to communicate in the local language as well, in Spanish, goes a really long way. So yeah, just treat people with kindness and respect, and you'll get it back.
Bonita, está grandota la perna. Ya se murió. Ya echaron. Ahí se vaya. Adiós, para la próxima. Adiós, para
Adios.
la próxima.
So tip number 3, it's also closely related to my second tip, and it's speak Spanish wherever and whenever you can. And I also mentioned that in my Tulum Things to Know video. Now there's a misconception about Playa del Carmen that you can get by with speaking English, and most people speak in English to you. And while that is true, because there is a large tourist industry in Playa del Carmen, Cancun and Tulum, I've generally found though that speaking Spanish really goes a long way in terms of making connections with the local people. You also get better service, and you also get treated better as well. And it's just easier to get around when you can communicate in the local language. And even for simple things like shopping and bargaining, if you can speak in Spanish, then it's much easier for you to get bargains. For me, for example, I am at an intermediate level of Spanish. So whenever I go shopping, or especially on 5th Avenue, and I try to bargain, people will say to me, oh, you speak Spanish? Okay, you get a discount. And when I was living in Tulum, for example, for my apartment, I managed to negotiate the price of the rent down. I think it was like 15,000 pesos down to 13,500. And that was because I also spoke Spanish, so I understood the nuances of certain things after being here for 3 years. And the same thing when I moved to Playa del Carmen as well. I was also able to negotiate the price of my apartment down to $500 US. And that's just something that you begin to pick up after a while, because when you speak Spanish, you get to learn about the nuances and things you can and can't do in a way that I think if you're just communicating in English all the time, you wouldn't be able to either bargain or understand how certain things work here. So definitely I would say learn Spanish. It really goes a long way, not only in just everyday communication, but you just get to pick up things that you wouldn't when you're speaking English all the time. There's a saying a friend of mine told me a few days ago, that when you speak English all the time or just communicate in English in Mexico, it's like being colorblind. Sure, you can see, but because you're colorblind, there's certain colors that you miss out on. There's just certain things that you miss out on because you can't see the full spectrum. And it's definitely the same when you're speaking in English all the time and not communicating in Spanish. So definitely speak Spanish. It goes a long way and it'll make your experience in Mexico much better. So tip number 4, also closely related to that, is bargain, bargain, bargain. Don't be afraid to bargain. Yes, Playa del Carmen does have a reputation for being a scam city and having scammers along 5th Avenue. So for that reason, it's important to know how to bargain and negotiate. And like I said earlier, if you can do that in Spanish, even better. Don't be afraid to bargain and negotiate and ask for a discount, because most likely as a foreigner, they're already charging you a premium price for whatever you're buying or taking. So for example, a taxi or buying souvenirs on 5th Avenue. That isn't always the case that you should negotiate and ask for a discount. So for example, in fancier places or definitely in shopping malls and restaurants, you wouldn't attempt to negotiate or bargain. But for the most part, like taking a taxi and like I said, buying souvenirs and things off vendors off the street, don't be afraid to bargain and negotiate. And I like it because it's almost like a song and dance routine. They name a price, you name a price, you have a laugh, you negotiate, and then you come to a final price. And even if it doesn't always work out, then there's still no harm in asking and trying. So yeah, definitely negotiate and bargain if you can. Tip number 5, safety. So a lot of people are always wondering, is Mexico safe? Should I come to Mexico? And for the 3 years that I've been here on and off visiting and living, I've never had issues with safety or a situation where I felt my personal safety was being threatened. A lot of the issues when it comes to safety and violence in Quintana Roo has to do with cartel activity. So there's been a lot of violence over the past few years, and especially the last few months, and in Tulum in general, where there's been cartel activity, mostly shootings. So I'd say most of the violence and the safety issues have to do with cartel drugs and cartel activity. So that said, I am not your mom and I wouldn't tell you what to do, but I would say if you want to avoid violence and getting into any unsafe situations here in Mexico, especially in Playa del Carmen, it will be stay away from the drug scene. Don't buy drugs from people on the streets. On 5th Avenue especially a lot, you'll find people trying to offer you drugs. So stay away from that kind of like drug activity and you'll generally be fine. And that also has to do with police activity as well. Sometimes the police will search people on 5th Avenue randomly, and they'll search you for drugs, and they're targeting people who look like they take drugs. So in general, if you want to be safer here in Quintana Roo, I'd say stay away from the drug scene as much as you can. So tip number 6 is closely related to the last tip, and that is police and corruption. So be careful of the police here. The police here aren't always your friends. There have been a lot of stories over the last few years, and particularly now over the last year, with people being involved in altercations with the police, which resulted in them being bribed or extorted by the police, being threatened to send to jail, or just being stopped and harassed on the streets, especially around 5th Avenue. So as you notice, 5th Avenue is somewhere where a lot of that kind of like stuff happens, a lot of the drama. But anyway, yeah, when it comes to the police, just always be on the lookout and try to keep away from them as much as you can. And even in such situations where someone has been robbed or they've had an issue and they've called the police haven't always been very helpful and useful. So yeah, in that situation, just be always mindful of the police and try to avoid putting yourself in situations where you end up being extorted or bribed or harassed. So yeah, when it comes to the police, just be mindful that the police here aren't always your friends, and given a chance they might just extort or bribe or harass you. And that said, I don't want to paint all the police here with the same paintbrush and say the police here are bad. There are situations I've heard of where the police have been very helpful and be very good. So just in general, I think when it comes to the police, just proceed with caution here. So number 7, the dogs are the dogs. So Mexico in general has a lot of dogs, and Playa del Carmen is no exception. And don't get me wrong, I love dogs and I don't have a problem with them. The problem though is when I'm trying to get a good night's sleep. A lot of Mexican households have an average of 2 to 5 dogs per household. So it's not just the stray dogs you have to deal with, but at night when you're trying to sleep, a lot of them will be barking. So my tip is make sure you bring a good pair of earplugs, or make sure that the neighborhood you move into doesn't have a lot of dogs. So the next tip is all about sargassum or seaweed. So a lot, if not many, of the beaches in Quintana Roo have problems with seaweed. That includes Tulum, Cancun, and Playa del Carmen. So I'm sure as you've seen in parts of this video, there have been sargassum as I've been walking along the beach. So the amount of seaweed that you actually get depends not only on the day or the week, but sometimes the time of day as well. For example, 2 weeks ago I was here at Playa 88 and there was hardly any seaweed at the beach. And now 2 weeks later, there's seaweed all over the beach and they're busy cleaning it, as you can see. So when you come to Playa del Carmen, make sure to plan for some seaweed as part of your trip. Number 9, which is the last one and a quick one, is always decline the currency conversion fee at an ATM and just accept the one that your bank back home automatically charges for you. That's because the ATMs here are scams. Well, they're not scams, but they tend to charge you a lot more. So if you accept the currency conversion fee, I don't remember what the conversion fee is exactly, but it's a lot more than what your bank would charge you. So just always decline it, and your bank automatically at home will add the a cheaper fee to it. And that's it. I really couldn't think of a 10th one beyond what other people might have mentioned before. But if you have a 10th one, make sure to drop it along in the comments below. Actually, I just thought of a last one as I was leaving, and that's because someone just sent me a message and asked me about the Wi-Fi. And that's a question that I get a lot here in Playa del Carmen, is how good is the Wi-Fi here, or is it strong enough for me to work? And the answer to that question is, well, the Wi-Fi here is good. I wouldn't say it's the best in Mexico. For that, you'd have to go to Mexico City, Guadalajara, or Monterrey. But in general, I'll say that the Wi-Fi in Playa del Carmen is pretty good and strong enough for you to work. But ultimately, it will not only depend on the house or the building that you're in, but also depend on the coverage that you have. But in general, I'll say that don't worry about being able to come here and not work remotely. Since I've been here, I've had no problems doing Zoom calls, doing my day-to-day work, sending emails, streaming, downloading videos, uploading videos. So I wouldn't worry about the Wi-Fi in Playa del Carmen in general. So I hope you found this video useful. And if you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. And look out for more videos from me in the future about Playa del Carmen and about living and traveling through Mexico. Adios.